Okay, so let me start this off straight. No dramatic build-up, no slow drum roll. Because honestly, what happened this week doesn't need any decoration. It's already wild on its own. You ever have one of those moments where you hear something and your brain just goes, no way that was actually said out loud? Yeah, that was me this morning. And the thing is, I've lived through enough political chaos in the last few years that my tolerance should be pretty high by now, but apparently not high enough. So here's what kicked it all off. The former president, because of course it was him, casually talked about launching military strikes inside Mexico, like he's ordering takeout. No nuance, no hesitation, no diplomatic pretext, nothing. Just straight to, yeah, we could bomb Mexico. And the craziest part? He sounds bored saying it, like he's talking about changing the oil in his car. Also, potentially launching strikes in Mexico or putting American troops or American personnel into Mexico to deal with. Would I launch strikes in Mexico to stop drugs? It's okay with me. When you watch that clip, you can literally see the room freeze for a second. Everyone's doing that internal calculation like, wait, does he know Mexico is a sovereign nation? Does he know this would be an act of war? But you know what? That's just the warm-up. Because about 24 hours after he said that, something happened at the border that honestly feels like the setup for a season premiere of a political thriller. Except it's real life. So Mexican media started reporting this super weird incident down by Playa Baghdad. It's this beach where the Rio Grande meets the Gulf. Locals wake up one morning and boom, there are U.S. Department of Defense warning signs sticking out of the sand. Not like someone dropped a sticker. Full metal signs, English and Spanish, military fonts. Restricted area, Department of Defense property. Unauthorized entry prohibited, the whole deal. And here's where it gets even weirder. These signs weren't placed on the U.S. side of the border. They were placed squarely on Mexican land. Meaning if those signs were official, which at that moment nobody actually knew, someone just unilaterally declared a chunk of Mexico as Pentagon property. Yeah, try explaining that diplomatically. Obtain exclusive video from the environmental agency Global, where you can see Mexican Marines removing the signs. Warning signs that suddenly appeared on the Mexican land, an area known as Playa Baghdad. We're told that the persons who allegedly placed the signs came from the U.S. side of the border and can be seen in these pictures. The signs say that this is a restricted area and property of the Department of Defense. It also states that unauthorized entry is prohibited. So the Mexican Marines roll in, and you'll see this in the clip. And they're literally pulling the signs out of the sand like someone planted fake no trespassing signs on their driveway. Except these aren't kids pranking their neighbor. These signs claim to represent the United States military. And people on the Mexican side say the folks who put them up crossed over from the US side, installed the signs, and then walked back like they were returning from a beach jog. And look, I know this country has a long history of doing questionable things at borders, but putting military signage on another nation's territory, that is a diplomatic alarm bell. You don't do that by accident. You don't accidentally create a restricted U.S. defense zone on the soil of another country. And the timing, 24 hours after Trump floated the idea of strikes in Mexico, is a little too on the nose to ignore. Like someone took his quote and turned it into a weekend side project. And right when everyone is trying to figure out if this is a misunderstanding, a rogue contractor, a miscommunication, or the opening scene of an international incident, the story takes another hard turn. On the same day this beach sign mess broke, Trump publicly accused 6 Democratic lawmakers of committing sedition. Not just sedition in the rhetorical sense. He specifically referenced sedition punishable by death. Death as in execution. And these lawmakers, they're not random backbenchers. They're veterans, former intelligence officers, Navy officers, Army Rangers, people who actually served. All they did was make a video reminding the military that illegal orders don't have to be followed. Totally legal, totally normal, totally within the Constitution. And yet somehow in Trump's mind, that equals punishable by death. And that's where everything starts connecting in a way that's honestly pretty frightening. A president talking about bombing a neighboring nation, mysterious U.S. military signs showing up on that nation's land the next morning, and then him calling political opponents seditious on the same day. You don't even need to be a political expert to feel the escalation here. You can just sense something is fundamentally off. So now you've got this perfect storm brewing. Trump tossing around military threats like he's narrating a video game. Random Pentagon-style signs showing up on foreign soil, and him casually suggesting that elected officials who disagree with him should face the death penalty. It's one of those days where you just sit there thinking, how is this not the headline everywhere? But somehow we're all so numb to chaos that it barely cracks the top of the news cycle. But here's the thing. While most of us are trying to process what's going on, people inside Congress are taking this very seriously. Senator Schumer, for example, jumps out immediately and basically says, this is a new low. This is dangerous. And he's not being dramatic. When a former president starts labeling specific lawmakers as traitors by name, you don't take that lightly. You increase their security. Schumer, who has gone this low? I have never seen a president or heard of a president who has done more to encourage political violence. I have asked the Capitol Police to give special protection and keep an eye on Slotkin and Kelly as well, because you gotta worry after the president says these things. And in that clip, you can hear it in Schumer's voice. That's not political theater. That's a man who has watched how Trump's words turn into threats, and how sometimes those threats turn into people showing up with zip ties and tactical gear. If the leader of a major political party publicly calls you an enemy of the state, you don't assume it's harmless. You assume there's a non-zero chance someone listening will try something. But while that political firestorm is raging, the Mexico situation is exploding on its own timeline. And honestly, this part feels like it should have been the front page of every newspaper because the footage coming out of that beach is just surreal. You've got Mexican Marines in uniform marching onto their own beach to take down warning signs supposedly put up by the United States military. That alone would be strange. But then the details keep stacking, and only for a surprising discovery on the Mexican side of the border just across from Texas, raising concerns tonight about what could be a growing international incident. Now, this all comes just one day after President Trump says he would consider authorizing military action inside Mexico to stop drug trafficking. We have exclusive videos showing Mexican Marines pulling down warning signs in Mexico that some say were placed there by the U.S. Yami Verhin has the exclusive details. Trump launched strikes in Mexico to stop drugs. Narrator. 24 hours after those comments, Mexican media is reporting an unusual incident on the coast of Mexico and the U.S., where the Rio Grande flows into the Gulf. We have obtained exclusive video from the environmental agency Cornelio Globa, where you can see Mexican Marines removing the signs, warning signs that suddenly appeared on the Mexican land, an area known as Playa Baghdad. We're told that the persons who allegedly placed the signs came from the U.S. side of the border and can be seen in these pictures. And the signs say that this is a restricted area and property of the Department of Defense. It also states that unauthorized entry is prohibited, and if you're found here, you may be detained and searched. But within hours, the Mexican Marines taking the signs down from the beach that is frequented by Mexican beachgoers and fishermen. The president of Mexico said a U.S. office later did admit hiring a company to put up the signs, arguing that the river shifts and the treaty requires the boundary to be clearly redefined. Prof. Jeffrey, I am perplexed why any U.S. agency would put that there. Narrator, Professor Jeffrey Korn is the chair of criminal law and the director of military law and policy at the Texas Tech School of Law. He says a sign like that can only be placed for one of two reasons, but never on sovereign Mexican soil. Prof. Jeffrey, that means a security regulation promulgated by the Secretary of Defense related to a military facility, or it could be by NASA or one of the subordinate military departments. The clip breaks it down. The people who allegedly placed the signs came from the U.S. side. The signs were planted on Mexican land. The message was explicit. Department of Defense property. Restricted area. And that's not a harmless label. That's a legal classification. That's saying this land belongs to us. Stay out or face consequences. Like, imagine waking up tomorrow and finding signs like that from another country stuck in the sand in Florida or Texas. We'd be losing our minds. And Mexico wasn't having it. The Marines didn't hesitate. They pulled the signs out the same day. That alone tells you how seriously they took it. Nations don't let foreign military markers sit on their soil for even a minute. That's how border disputes start. That's how treaties get invoked. Historically, whole wars have kicked off over less, and then, while everyone's scrambling to figure out what the hell is going on, reporters start digging, and the story gets even stranger. Because according to Mexican officials, the U.S. eventually admitted that yes, contractors were hired to put up the signs, but they blamed it on the river shifting. Like, oops, sorry, the Rio Grande moved and we accidentally put signs in Mexico. Come on, you don't mismeasure an international border by that much. This isn't a backyard fence. This is one of the most geopolitically sensitive lines on Earth. And the timing? Just a day after Trump talks about military action inside Mexico? That's not a coincidence you ignore. And this is where all of this starts to feel less like individual events and more like the early chapters of a problem. Because when you pair Trump's rhetoric which includes accusing political rivals of sedition punishable by death, with a literal physical intrusion on Mexico's territory, you start to see a pattern of behavior. A pattern where the boundaries between legal, illegal, respectful, and reckless get completely erased. And the scariest part, none of these things happened with Trump actually in office right now. These are his words, his influence, his followers, and his worldview, all still having real effects on international relations. He's not in the Oval Office, and yet somehow the Mexican military is reacting to something tied to him. That should make everyone pause for a second. Because if a guy can cause this kind of ripple effect out of office, what does it look like when he's back in control? And the thing is, just when you think the escalation can't go any further, it does. Because instead of backing away from the situation, instead of saying something like, okay, maybe that clip about striking Mexico was taken out of context, Trump doubles down, like instantly. He gets asked again about using military force in Mexico, and without missing a beat, without even pretending to consider the diplomatic consequences, he basically says, yeah, sure, whatever we have to do. Like Mexico is some extension of US property he accidentally left the garage door open on. Listen to that clip and tell me he sounds measured. Tell me he sounds like someone thinking about treaties or international law, or even the most basic concept of sovereignty. He talks about launching strikes with the same tone you'd use to talk about fixing a pothole. No hesitation, no sense of the weight of what he's saying. Just a kind of, if we need to, we need to. And Mexico's response is immediate. It's not careful. It's not ambiguous. It's not, we're monitoring the situation. It's straight up, no, not allowed, not happening. Their president, Claudia Sheinbaum, rejects the idea entirely. And she should. Because any country that hears a potential US president casually float the idea of sending troops into their territory is going to shut that down instantly. You'll notice the clip frames it like this is just another normal day in diplomacy, but it's not. Presidents don't normally threaten to send military forces into neighboring countries. Nations don't normally wake up to DoD signs stuck in their beaches. And lawmakers don't normally have to publicly reassure the military that they are allowed to refuse illegal orders. None of this is normal. And that brings us back to the video made by those Democratic lawmakers, the one Trump labeled as sedition punishable by death. If you actually watch it, it's one of the calmest, most responsibly framed statements you can imagine. Now, these aren't radicals. These aren't people calling for rebellion. These are veterans, former Navy, Army Rangers, CIA officers, reminding the military of the oath they took. Not to a man, not to a party, but to the Constitution. I'm Senator Alyssa Slotkin, Senator Mark Kelly, Representative Chris DeLuzio, Congresswoman Maggie Goodlander, Representative Chrissy Houlihan, Congressman Jason Crow. I was a captain in the United States Navy, a former CIA officer, former Navy, former paratrooper and Army Ranger, former intelligence officer, former Air Force. We want to speak directly to members of the military and the intelligence community who take risks each day to keep Americans safe. We know you are under enormous stress and pressure right now. Americans trust their military, but that trust is at risk. This administration is pitting our uniformed military and intelligence community professionals against American citizens like us. You all swore an oath to protect and defend this Constitution. And right now, the threats to our Constitution aren't just coming from abroad, but from right here at home. Our laws are clear. You can refuse illegal orders. You can refuse illegal orders. You must refuse illegal orders. No one has to carry out orders that violate the law or our Constitution. We know this is hard and that it's a difficult time to be a public servant. But whether you're serving in the CIA, the Army, our Navy, the Air Force, your vigilance is critical. And know that we have your back, because now more than ever, the American people need you. We need you to stand up for our laws, our Constitution, and who we are as Americans. Don't give up. Don't give up. Don't give up. Don't give up the ship. The moment you hear them repeat, you can refuse illegal orders, you understand why Trump flipped out. Because that sentence hits at the one thing he hates acknowledging: the limits on his power. A president is not a king. A president's commands are not absolute, and if he ever tried to give an order that violates the law, whether it's ignoring the courts, using the military for political punishments, or crossing into another country illegally, the military is required to say no. That video wasn't subversion. It was civic education. It was the kind of message you give when you see warning signs, when you notice someone flirting with authoritarian impulses, when you start witnessing behavior that feels like it's inching toward a line that should never be crossed. It was a reminder designed to prevent a crisis, not create one. And yet Trump reacted as if this was a direct attack on him personally, which kind of tells you everything. Because if your first instinct when someone says illegal orders must be rejected is to accuse them of treason, you might not be planning to give legal orders. What makes this moment so tense is that all these things are happening at once. Trump threatening military action, strange DoD signage showing up on foreign soil, Mexico having to intervene, senators increasing security, veterans reminding the military of its constitutional obligations. It creates this picture of a government, or at least a political movement, drifting toward a place where the usual guardrails are starting to bend. And whether you love Trump, hate Trump, or don't care about politics at all, you can feel the instability. You can feel the tension between institutions and one man's worldview. You can feel how thin the line is between political rhetoric and political action. And it's not a comfortable place for a democracy to be. And honestly, by the time you connect all these pieces, the picture is so clear it's almost uncomfortable to look at. You've got a former president openly floating the idea of bombing a neighboring country. You've got physical evidence, literal signs showing up on that country's soil with Department of Defense printed on them. You've got senators scrambling to make sure their colleagues stay safe because the same guy is out here throwing around words like sedition punishable by death. And then you've got military veterans reminding troops that they're allowed to deny illegal orders, something that shouldn't even need to be said, unless someone out there is giving them a reason to worry. All of this is happening in the same week, the same news cycle. These aren't disconnected incidents. They're all pointing in one direction toward a political environment where the old guardrails, the norms, the expectations, the limits on power are starting to warp. And the thing that scares me the most is how easily this could escalate further without anyone fully intending it to. All it takes is one misunderstanding at the border, one overreaction, one misinterpreted comment, one fanatic deciding to take Trump's sedition punishable by death line too literally. And that's the part we never talk about enough, how fragile political stability actually is. People think institutions are these giant sturdy buildings made of marble and steel. They're not. They're made of trust. They're made of boundaries everyone agrees to respect. Once you start tearing at those, it doesn't matter how many laws you have written down on paper. If the people in power stop caring about them, those laws turn into decoration. And look, I get it. Some people think all of this is just politics, that everything Trump says is just words, that he doesn't really mean it, that his followers interpret him incorrectly. But that's not how leadership works. Words from powerful people create incentives. They shape behavior. They change what's considered acceptable. When a former president says he's okay with launching strikes in Mexico, it moves the Overton window. When he says lawmakers are committing death penalty-worthy sedition for reminding the military to obey the Constitution, that shifts the boundaries of what's considered normal political disagreement. This is how erosion happens, not with one dramatic moment, but with a slow stacking of smaller moments that, taken together, start pulling the whole system off balance. And that's why Mexico reacted the way it did. It wasn't just about the signs. It was about the signal behind the signs. Someone felt bold enough to plant U.S. military warnings on Mexican soil. Someone felt justified. Someone felt like maybe boundaries don't matter as much anymore. The lawmakers made that video because deep down they see the same shift. They sense the same pressure building. They can feel the country moving into a space where the next crisis isn't some far-off hypothetical. It's something you can practically see forming in the haze. And that's why the ending to all this feels so heavy, because this isn't just about Trump being Trump. It's about what happens when a political movement treats democratic limits like suggestions, when the idea of using the military for political ends stops being unthinkable, when calling opponents traitors becomes casual, when foreign nations have to physically remove signs to protect their sovereignty. You can like Trump, you can hate him, you can be totally neutral. But you can't deny that something about this moment feels different, like the guardrails are thinner, the stakes are higher, and the potential for real damage is way closer than most people want to admit. And maybe that's why the video ends the way it does, with that simple line, "This man is out of control." It's not an insult. It's not campaign rhetoric. It's a warning. The kind you give before something breaks, not after. Because if this is what the situation looks like when he's not even president, imagine, just imagine, what it looks like if he's back in the chair with the full weight of the U.S. government behind him. That's the real question. And it's one we're going to have to answer sooner than we think.